welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. We're glad that you have tuned in this program today. We ask you to participate yourselves at 12:15. The program goes for 1 whole hour, and at 12:15 we open the microphone and the telephones to you so that we might hear your thoughts and your comments about the program that you have heard. So please think about what you might want to tell us, what your own experience is, what your reactions might be to our program. What we're talking about today is the whole question of what is salvation and how is it understood in different religious traditions. In this case, we're looking at a Christian tradition. We're also looking at the Buddhist tradition. And to help us do that, we have Dr. Richard Does, who is he teaches meditation at the Shambhala Center here in Burlington. And we have the Reverend Craig Smith, who is the Episcopal rector and priest at Trinity Shelburne. So welcome, both of you, to the program.
Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here again. I don't know who wants to start off, but let me begin it from my point of view, and then one of you might jump in. As I was saying earlier, if you're being saved, saved from an ice storm, saved from a blizzard, something is being done to help you, so you're not victimized or suffer from some event. In a religious context, as I thought about today's program, the event, at least from the Christian point of view, is how are you saved from being punished at your death by God and suffering forever and ever in hell, or perhaps not existing anymore at all when your body dies, then your spirit dies as well. That's one way of looking at salvation from a Christian point of view. I'm not saying it's necessarily my point of view or Craig Smith's point of view, but
it is not. Yeah.
But that is one point of view, and I think there's a lot of muddy thinking around the whole subject of salvation, and that's one reason why I sponsored this conversation today. And as I understand it from the Buddhist perspective, salvation isn't so much, isn't at all being saved from a God who is going to punish us when we die if we haven't done some ritual, special religious kinds of things. Rather, salvation, if a Buddhist would at all use that term, would be how do I live a whole life? How do I live in an inner peace in this world? And the Buddhist wouldn't be worrying about what world would follow. Now, I may have spoken to you or violated either of your viewpoints. I don't know. So I'm trying to crank you up here.
Well, there's a lot of nervousness when you, and the Vermont joke, I think, sort of catches it. What is that? Brother, have you been saved? Well, I didn't know I was lost. That kind of thing. And there's a whole. To me, the issue of salvation has to do with something that's very concrete, historical, experienced in the Judeo-Christian faith, anyhow, and that it's something that's an event that's actually occurred, and yet has not fully occurred. So that, for instance, the main event for the Jewish faith, and really for the Christian faith too, is the Passover, and that is the deliverance from bondage in Egypt, a concrete deliverance from oppression, and the experience of having been carried out of bondage into a new life.
That's in this world, on this planet.
Very much so. And the same way, what it shows, the event, is it shows who God is, or what God is like, what God is doing, or what God is up to, or what God wants to see happen. That event shows basically the character of God. So a righteous God is a God who saves, that is, who delivers, who brings out of slavery, brings freedom, and out of a place of oppression brings a new life and a promise. So that's one example, and I suppose the Christian example of that is we call it Passover 2, which is the whole life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ, by which we are delivered from the power of death, from the power of sin. And once again, what's important about the event, the saving event, is it shows who God is. God's righteousness is to make whole, or to deliver, that is, to set free. And so I think it's more, what does the actual event show about who God is?
But of course, God didn't save Jesus from being crucified.
Exactly.
And if you look around in the world today, or at any time in history, you see many times where people have been unjustly suffering from illness, or from war, or from family discord, who knows what. So where is God in those cases?
Well, again, that's to me, how does anybody live through a period of suffering? What is there ever a quality of suffering that is redemptive? That is suffering that is taken on behalf of someone else. I think the Buddhist parallel to this, as I understand it, would be something like the Bodhisattva, who would intentionally take on a serving, sort of a suffering or a serving capacity as part of their expression of oneness with the world about them. So, again, does it show what God's love is like, who God is, and to know God as one who lays down life, that is, as an expression of love or of compassion, is that a healing event? And I think we talk about it on a human level. Is that an event that brings wholeness to people who are in need, when one human being does that to another? And to my way of thinking, it opens up what salvation is as to being very much a relational thing.
Dick, how about you from the Buddhist point of view?
I think the struggle in differentiating between the Buddhist and the Christian approach, speaking as a Buddhist of some 20 years, and prior to that having been raised as a Christian in a Catholic church. So having at least one emotional, psychological, spiritual leg in each of those traditions, speaking from my own experience, the challenge of seeking redemption or salvation or liberation from suffering in the Buddhist tradition is not a challenge that's contingent upon having an external savior, as it were. Whereas my understanding is that in the Christian tradition there is, as you just stated, Craig, the sense of redemption occurring through the auspices of God or His Son. But the Buddhist approach doesn't deny the existence of God per se, but doesn't posit the need for an external savior, as it were, and has a different sense of what constitutes the viability of the human, the worth of the human, I guess. That it's not so much that the human has failed and needs to be lifted up through an external intervention, but has become confused and has lost touch with one's basic nature, which has the quality of brilliant clarity, wisdom, and all-encompassing awareness as a fundamental capacity, enlightened nature, another way of putting it. So the Buddhist approach is to help the person to save themselves from their own confusion and despair and fear and hopelessness and sense of loss or disconnection not from God in the Buddhist instance, but from their own nature.
I guess the parallel to that, because there's so many different metaphors for talking about salvation in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I think the parallel to that would be the theological notion we're made in God's image, and so made as containers literally for the divine life. In other words, that's what our purpose is, so that salvation in some sense is the restoration to that purpose for which we are made. So in that sense there is a kind of a linkage. So there's the metaphors for salvation, of course, run through the whole salvation history. So you've got you're really there's which metaphors do you choose to land on? I think are what would help to denote the differences between one theological or church denominational tradition and another, is what's emphasized. But I would because this has been in the Roman Catholic theologian, of course, Matthew Fox, trying to do some reclamation of the tradition of instead of the original curse or the original sin, instead in his book called it the original blessing. Again, with the idea of the affirmation of life, that we are more co-creators with God rather than, and participate in God's life rather than we are external to that life that God, that is expressed through the creation. So there's been a lot of shifting, I think, depending on where we focus the lens, I think.
Anything that helps to shift the focus away from a pre-existing guilt or unworthiness or dislocation or sense of fallen from grace and so forth is helpful in terms of seeing more of a rapprochement between the views.
Right.
I think probably a lot of people, former Judeo-Christians who become Buddhists in the last 25 years or 30 years are lapsed Christians or lapsed Jews who found some sort of antagonism in their faith by birth, where there was some kind of a sense of rejection or an anger that there was a postulation of unworthiness, or somehow the guilt aspects of it made it difficult for many of those folks to find a haven in Judeo-Christianity, whereas when they were exposed to the teachings of they call the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, there was much more of a sense of proximal, of accommodation and non-splitting. I think that was my major sense of interest in it, is that it resolved the split. That we don't have to postulate that there is a benign or a malevolent external creative force in order to work with our own confusion and difficulties and struggles. It really isn't essential to whether it's true or whether it's not true it's possible to actually work with one's mind, one's experience, one's struggle of the spirit, and reach a state of a personal calm and peace and comfort, and have some confidence that this would carry over in the next life, if there is a next life. I think that's another difference. Buddhism postulates that you continue to recycle lives until you get it straight, till you reach your own enlightened nature.
And that's that issue of how do we grow into the identity that we're given by God? How do we, in some sense, lay claim to it? How do we receive it and use it? This is, this to me is the, I think what an awful lot of what's misunderstood by or never quite maybe taught as a practical approach. For folks who look at Buddhism, there's a lot of practice. There's a lot of concentration on how do you practice this, this opening oneself up to spiritually, to being changed. So there's a very, what I found in my own life was that I was only opened up to the spiritual life and tradition of the Christian church by first looking at Buddhist meditational practices, and also practices from other, well, one of them was Sufi twirling. I can remember it just as a means to kind of become aware of ourselves and where we're claimed by false identities in many ways.
So you've looked to other traditions for help in your own living out of your Christian tradition.
Well, certainly, I think it's because an awful lot of the Western Christian tradition has lost the emphasis on practice and has put much more emphasis on doctrine, without really helping people in a practical way to attend to prayer, to a spiritual, spiritual discipline that does help one live out one's Christian life. So in many ways, this is why I believe that what people are thirsty for now is very much so.
There's a theological word that doesn't get used very often, but it describes what you're saying. It's sanctification.
Yeah, the whole process of, there are actually some things that we can do that help us to grow. And I mean, so when I look at the, meditation, it's not the meditation itself that's going to do it, right? It's not exactly how you do it, but it's that whole process in some sense of opening oneself up to being changed. And is that neutral? That's the thing that I'm not. That I suppose an allegation might be, who is it, what's at work in the process, or how do you even talk about what's going on in the process of prayer or meditation? That is, how does if we're going to keep the word alive here, the salvation, how is this process of being integrated or experiencing one's wholeness, how does that
come about?
Yeah, how does that come about?
What's the process?
Yeah, there might be some differentiations between the two traditions there.
Well, there are probably as many parallels as there are differentiations when you get down to what, like how you're talking about, when what we're yearning for are ways to make these things real. And, it's like mining for gold, or there's the faith that the size of a mustard seed will allow you to move a mountain in the Christian tradition, and the Buddhist, the pounding of the sesame seed in order to get the oil from the sesame seed. The sense of actually being able to work with the material of our lives and to fashioning them into a whole cloth or the pure or that characterizes our basic nature,
Right.
in the likeness and image of
The-
God, as you put it.
Right, and then there's the sort of the paradox too, that you can do all this stuff and nothing can happen, and unless it's in some sense, unless it's well, more in the Zen Buddhist tradition, unless there's some kind of a what we would in Christian faith call a moment of grace or a gift, so that awareness comes as a gift. You can do all the work. The work may be necessary, but without the gift, it's without the gift or of enlightenment, or it's really
That's an interesting
there's tensions.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's bestowing the gift, or how is it that one accesses the gift?
Right.
That's where maybe the mechanisms differentiate in terms of, is it coming from some external source that you have qualified in the eyes of the bestower of the gift, or is it actually coming from can't think of the Latin term for it, but the interregnum, or the actual fiber of one's own being, that doesn't have anything to do with an external agent proferring it.
Right.
I think that's kind of the major point of departure in how one thinks about, how I think about the two religions.
Yeah, and I'm not even completely clear, because in the if you look at somebody like Meister Eckhart, who is a mystic in the Christian tradition, and the boundary that the language suggests there is between God, the Creator, God expressed in the life of Jesus,
right,
or God expressed in much more mysteriously in the life of the risen Christ who permeates all things, or sort of, or God as spirit or breath, that is as close to us as can be, who is very much our life force. Which, in a sense, that's where I think there's the connection, is that sort of that life force that's within us, that the Christian understanding of the world says, by the resurrection, by the cross and resurrection, the whole world has been delivered. So the deliverance is there. Then at some point, for the Christian faith, the deliverance has been accomplished, but there's at some point, there's the receiving of the gift. It's there, it's done. Then how do you open up the gift?
How do you
use this gift? So that salvation is that's where there is a relational pattern. So it's objectively accomplished now.
That gets back to what I think you were saying about the difference between doctrine and process. That the doctrine is, we can debate and argue the doctrine,
right,
and get into all kinds of hair splitting about its relevance and meaning.
Sure.
But when it comes down to the actual nitty-gritty of experiencing salvation or liberation or freedom from suffering, or the peace that passes all understanding, maybe it's the same ultimate phenomenon.
Right.
Well, the Dalai Lama and Thomas Merton felt it was the same, really.
Very much so.
In Merton's book, his Asian journal, he meets with the Dalai Lama, and they somewhat come to that conclusion, which might shock quite a few people.
Reality has a mind of its own, I used to say. And, regardless of how we might fall into the nominalistic propensity to try to describe phenomena, I think scientific research has also demonstrated that you can't really ultimately define anything in its reality just by naming it.
Right. You can say you have a relationship with it by naming it, but that doesn't mean there's not radical freedom. Still,
there's still a little skin that connects.
Yeah.
Well, now,
disconnects.
Dick, when people come to a Buddhist center, what are they seeking? What are they asking from you or from any Buddhist teacher? What are they looking for?
My teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, a Tibetan teacher, suggested that people seek Buddhist teachings, and maybe any kind of teachings, because they're desperate. There's some sense of desperation. My sense of the word desperation means that they're disappearing somehow from they don't feel as though they have some kind of connection or
becoming less
tangibility
themselves.
or linkage, or that they're confused, they're frightened, they're caught up in materialism and speed, and yearn for some kind of elixir, some kind of release from the constant dog-eat-dog world and harshness and meanness of the world, and are looking for some kind of relief.
Yep. And I would say that's the kind of only those who are, thirsty, or, in some sense, those who are aware of their need are invited. Look at the ones who Jesus depicts as being invited in to this banquet of salvation, to this place of, if you will, of unity. And it's the lame, the halt. It's the ones who are pretty much on the disenfranchised end. Those who are sinners, and those who are, in some sense, are very much aware of their need. And those who have no need, it's
right. They have no need.
Well,
they have no need.
Well, in parallel,
that can be said.
What parallel is there here for Christians? Now, if somebody comes to you and they want to become a member of your church, or they want to become baptized and become a Christian, what are they seeking for? We heard what Dick was saying, that they want to find an interior peace.
I don't think there's always people. I don't think people are always able even to articulate what it is that they're seeking. I think there's a certain kind of a silence, a kind of inability to put into words. But I think that's perfectly all right, because God is the one who has no name in the tradition. The most radical part of it is literally, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be, is the one who's calling them. So in many ways, the coming in is like you come into you're attracted for some reason, and then you learn about the family history, or you learn about many stories that may help you to interpret what is going on in your own life, and so piece by piece, you begin to hear through those events God speaking, and how God works in your own life. So that to me is why the ongoing process, we say we're working out our salvation in fear and trembling, or we're in the process of being saved. In other words, we're not at the church is not those who are saved. It is sort of like a soul-saving station. We're in the process of being made whole, rather than we've arrived. And I think that's very much a part of the New Testament understanding of those who are being baptized are coming into a community that is moving and is following God. But it's not something that it's not the end point of the destination. So I don't know that people always know why they're drawn, and I don't know that that's important either.
I always felt that the spaciousness of the churches that I've been in my life, the tabernacles, the kind of sacred space, maybe even sanctuary quality, but has some kind of a meaning for what people are looking for. That they can
physical spaciousness,
be in a context that is spacious and peaceful. And it also has some kind of pervasive elemental quality of light. There's some kind of light in it.
Yeah, we would talk about it in terms of sacrament, I think. It's saying an outward and visible sign of something that's of God. So that whether it's the building itself or the gathering of people, that holy gathering, or whether it's the sort of, I think, the notion of participating directly in the effects of an action, the sacrament of the Eucharist is really receiving the life that is offered, and it's in the context of, so yes, there's a historical part to it, but there's very much bringing that past event so that it is made available to the community of faith presently. So there's again a sense of dynamics at work in our being made whole, or use the word of salvation again. Salvation is something that you can receive.
So
today is the day of salvation. It's like.
Okay. So for you, salvation would be, in the Christian context, being made whole.
Yeah, it would. It would. And there's lots of other words for it, but we've already talked about some of them. Really, in some ways, being restored to understanding or receiving our identity as God's children. Just the many, many different ways of talking about the same reality. So.
Okay, that's not the way I think a lot of people think of Christianity. They think of, I know one person who said they thought of it as a way to get really high-quality life insurance for the life after this life. And that's what it's all about, to get insurance about the life that follows this life, so that they.
What do you think's going on there?
They're scared.
Right. Yeah.
They're scared.
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line between being sort of in awe of the holy and that sort of healthy fear, which is more of a sense of awe and in the face of mystery, and that I think then brings out reverence, as opposed to the fear that really ensures distance and people seeking sanctuary in sort of that negative sense, from someone to run and hide from. But there's, I suppose, a healthy fear, too, in the sense of knowing when we're violating the sacredness of life. So I don't laugh at all expressions of fear. I would say, what is it that you're, that is your image of God? What is it that you're positing you need to run from? What is your belief? And that's where I don't know, I was always fascinated in the Buddhist tradition by looking at being able to observe what's going on in the mind and be able to see how you create a distortion, or in a sense, the psychology of that. You can create the distortion that you then look at the world through this distorted lens that's being created by yourself.
Yeah.
You want to clarify what, so to speak, pun here, on what you mean by we create our own distortion? I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure.
I was trying to hand the ball on.
Well, I think of it sometimes as looking at one's own conditioning history that we carry around, that we have existing in our minds, a whole long string, boxcar after boxcar of feelings, emotions, events, recollections, hopes and fears, wishes, injustices, and so forth, that represent the kind of collected baggage of a lifetime, or lifetimes, if you take the view that this life is not just the first time that we have been around, that we may have had, according to Buddhist thinking, countless lives since beginningless time. And what is in our thoughts and feelings is really the amalgam of all of that prehistory, if you will. Right. So that, as you were saying a moment ago, Craig, when you can stop and look and pay attention to that potpourri, that tangled ball of yarn, all of the different tendrils and the weavings and confused like a room full of monkeys. The mind that is erratic and disjointed and all over the place like a UPI ticker tape giving all the stock quotations, can calm down. You can calm it down. You can see through it. You can begin to create spaciousness in your mind, like your own Thomas Paine said, my own mind is my own church. Your awareness, your tamed, calmed down, meditated awareness becomes more spacious and encompassing, and your basic intelligence becomes much more, you could say, your God-given intelligence, if you were of that mind, or you could say intelligence that is uncreated. There's a notion in Buddhism of that there isn't a necessity to posit a creation. That things just are, which is interesting. It kind of solves the dilemma of where did it begin and where's it going to end, and how can there be this universe, expanding universe? What's it expanding into? It just is. And in a calm and contemplative, focused, meditative state of mind, it's possible to discover that quality of uncreated awareness, intelligence, and at that point discover your true nature, which is free from fear and confusion, and only acts for the benefit of others.
Right. Yeah.
Would two of you want to comment about something I've been reading in this book I mentioned to you about Conversations with God, and the author was saying rather strongly that it's the institutional churches that create agnosticism, and that as children, generally speaking, we're much more aware of God and much more in touch with God. Then as we become adults, that fades away, not because we learn what is true, but because of all of the adult garbage.
Yeah, I think that's true of virtually any institution, not just religious. Educational institutions fall into the same. You could say that education continues notwithstanding the educational system. People continue to be good and kind and decent and loving irrespective of religious institutions and so forth. But I do agree that children certainly have a sacred quality of awareness and in them when they start out. One of the images that's used in meditation training for cultivating loving kindness is to imagine a newborn child, holding a newborn child in your arms and looking at that the sort of completely pure, radiant, translucent quality of energy and presence that is in a newborn. And to connect with that kind of energy and feel it in yourself.
Right. And I think same thing, it's pretty, unless you are born again, unless you become as a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of God. So the realm of reality that Jesus is referring to is one that is accessible to us. It's something that can be reclaimed. Another sort of note on that is that I find this, the Greek Orthodox emphasis on Mary as being Theotokos, being the one who bears God, as a way of understanding what a Christian life is about. That Mary is the model of discipleship, and that she bears God, so that there's a notion again that life is continually being recreated. That happens through that God's will, or through salvation is to recreate the world and our own lives. So that's not, that wonderment can happen, or that we can be aware of God doing that, maybe more properly speaking, that God's life is stirring in us, is something that can become a part of our spirituality if we let it.
What religion, the word itself, means to relink or reconnect. So
Yeah, to reconnect.
The implication is always in religions that we're trying to get back into touch with something that we're out of touch with. And I guess the question is, how did we lose touch in the first place? And I think Lee's comment about maybe do institutions in some way perpetuate the loss of touch, or somehow not acknowledge that as a child there already is an in-touchness? Can't we just celebrate the inherent presence and brilliance of all beings, the lame, the halt, the infirm, particularly are amenable to that. Maybe harder for the rich man to get through the eye of the needle than the camel, but everybody has that potential. In the Buddhist approach, everybody is considered to be a Buddha,
Right.
a latent Buddha.
Yeah.
And I suppose everybody has Christ consciousness in some views
Is a
of
Christ.
Christianity, is a Christ.
Is a Christ.
Yeah. So that we could all go out of business. We'd be best served going out
That's
of
what we're in
business.
business for, is to go out of business. Absolutely. Yeah.
Amen and hallelujah.
And I think that the primal institution is the, we're talking about understanding of human beings, that in the created order, at least the Judeo-Christian tradition says, the human being is created male and female in the image of God. So it's a communal being. It's not a, there's no such thing as individual salvation. There's no such thing as individual. That's pretty much not, and so, but there is, using the kind of language of Buddhism, there's an apparent illusion here that we are different, and that is, in many ways, when we begin to act that differently, or as though we can have life apart from the other, then that's what we've inherited.
Yeah, that's the confusion or the illusion of separateness.
Yeah. And so that would be called, that's your version of, your different way of languaging original sin. So you just don't call it that, but it's you call it differently.
Right.
But the reality that we're pointing to, so the institution that's the most messed up is the family. So how can you have other institutions that are less messed up or distorted, that pass on their distortions from generation to generation, and then expect somehow the institutions, religious, educational, governmental, or whatever they are, to be any less fraught with anxiety?
I suppose. Is another question for the two. In the last few years, I've run into a number of people who don't go to church or to a meditation center, a Buddhist center, and they tell me that they've had a terrible time in particularly historic religious organizations where they learned all about guilt, and they say that with a great deal of emphasis, like that's all we've had to contribute to people, a sense of their own guilt, and so they've decided to stay away from religious organizations because they're sick and tired of being told they're guilty. Do you want to respond to that, particularly in terms of being saved and salvation?
Well, it's certainly not a message that appeals to the highest form of the Spirit, and to be continuously dunned for your malfeasances. I can
well put.
I mean, who would amongst us would be inspired by that if that's the primary message that a person receives? You know, and I used to say, don't necessarily entrust yourself to those who claim to represent the faith,
Yeah.
Because they're just made of
Clay.
the same as everybody in some sense, and probably a lot of people go into the clergy and into the healing professions to try to repair their own rent
Sure.
fabric. I know that was probably true in my case in my selection of the field of psychology. And I had a family member, an uncle, who became a priest in hopes of repairing damages in our family. There was a lot of alcohol problems in the family past, and he was trying to, he hoped that by virtue of going into the clergy that he would somehow have a positive impact on the traditions of dissolution in the family. So we're all damaged in some sense, and I think sometimes maybe we convey messages that are damaging, which don't necessarily accurately represent the true message of any of the religions that we purport to represent.
I'm not sure where I would come in. I lost my train of thought here. I think your original question had to do with guilt, and
just that they
and
didn't.
whether folks decide to cut themselves off because the message seems to be predominantly about guilt, right? And I would agree that if the message is predominantly about guilt, that would be a very healthy thing for a person to do. To find another place where.
Okay.
Now, what I find is that the lack of differentiation. That is, if somebody just says that's all I ever hear, versus, then I would ask the question, are you guilty? In other words, are some of what is being talked about stirring in you feelings of guilt, versus is somebody accusing you, or are you accusing you? And that's where I would work with that person. I don't know unless I have that conversation.
Well, I'd like to talk some more about this, but it's past time for us to open the program to our viewers. So please, viewers, phone us. The number to call is on the television screen. We would like to hear your comments, your thoughts, your reactions to our conversations, and your own wonderings and musings and experience. Please call us. We have a little more than 10 minutes left to hear you, and we're eager to converse with you. This is Dr. Richard Does. He's a meditation teacher at a Buddhist center, and our other guest is the Reverend Craig Smith, who is the priest at Trinity Episcopal Church in Shelburne. So please call. This is Struggles of the Spirit, and we invite you to share your own struggle. So call us, please. So we will see.
Okay, shall we?
I guess getting back to my question about guilt is that I just somehow there have been many people who have, without my even inviting them to talk about the subject, have just dumped out their anger about being made to feel guilty, and I've responded, at least as an Episcopal priest, well, you know, the job of the church is to take away your guilt, not to give you guilt.
Yeah, to proclaim, you're right, to proclaim forgiveness of sin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's to close the distance, I mean, to repair it. And I wonder if there's a certain scariness in some people. Alan Jones, who's at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, and who taught moral theology as one of my teachers, he used to say, people are so afraid of losing the guilt that it's the glue of their life.
They need to be guilty?
Yeah, so if they're, because, you know, it's almost like a scary thought that if you receive forgiveness, what do you, in turn, again, what do you do with this gift? You might have to bury a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of garbage you're holding on to, and folks that you're, you know, not forgiving. Mm. So, and then the whole life might be totally rearranged and recreated. It's a scary thought for many people.
It is indeed. You have so much spaciousness in your life. At that point, what would you do? Yeah. How could you fill that space?
Yeah, come on,
if you were totally liberated from any kind of burden of self-recrimination.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Mm. I think that's true in the Buddhist understanding too of why we don't claim our enlightened nature straight away and altogether, mm-hmm. and realize that we're brilliant, and clear, and free from struggle and fear and recrimination. Mm-hmm. I think I had not heard that point made from a moral theologian before, but I think there's an awful lot of truth to that, mm-hmm. that we actually crave having something to hide in because mm-hmm. Liberation is too brilliant. It's just too much to accommodate.
I mean, the early Desert Fathers, they kind of talk about, you know, one of the disciplines of love would be, in terms of the practice of the faith, would be to defend the person who's most likely to be scapegoated in the community. Hmm. That the mark of the spiritually advanced person is the one who is ready to take the place and take on the sins of the one who's being scapegoated. And as far as a practical definition of love, or what it means to be a Christ, I think this is, mm-hmm. We could afford to get a lot more practical. Mm. I'm not sure that the teaching would go down so well, but because it's really bringing out the truth of what the good news is, which is liberation, you know.
You are forgiven.
Freedom to redefine and rearrange relationships, you know, playfulness.
That could be emphasized more.
Yes, it could be, definitely.
I think Lee's point is that a lot of times it seems as though the cudgel comes down on the side of your stripes and your malocclusions. And your
Ba-boom.
Yeah.
Ba-boom, yeah.
Mea culpas.
Yeah, mea culpas, right.
Well, I run across, I'm sure all of you run across people in their 40s or 50s who are still, you know, so upset about what their mother or father or whoever raised them did to them. And yeah, I appreciate that. I know what they mean. Mm. But what are you going to do with what you've got?
How does one drop hanging on to the tar baby, as it were?
Yeah, yeah.
How do you get your hand out of the tar?
Yeah, when it's Velcro, how can it become Teflon, you know? How do we become Teflon with these things? That's one of those things where, you know, technique isn't going to save you, information isn't going to save you. There's a gift, in a sense, there.
That's where you started out the discussion. That moment of grace, I think, is how you put it at the first, where you can receive that gift and somehow take it. How do you do that? That's a wonderful question.
Why don't you rephrase that question, Dick? It's for our viewers. We're waiting for you people to phone in. But meanwhile,
we're talking about how can we open ourselves, allow ourselves to be touched, and acknowledge the gifts that we have or the gifts that are available. How can we really appreciate it? What can we do to liberate ourselves from the necessity to stay stuck in our misery and our past hurts, and be golden, so to speak? Is it too hard to be golden?
Yeah, it's very interesting because the image that is a covering over of the sins that's the self. God is one who, by who God is, and again, God's righteousness is one that covers over sins, that covers over that which looks like fracture, that chooses not to regard it but regard as whole. So in a sense brings about that reality. So if you can look at somebody who's really, if you can look at somebody whose life is fractured as a whole person, and you can reflect that back to them, that's what parent, sort of somewhat what a parent does, is reflect back a sort of an affirmation of a capability to handle, to deal with adversity, and to become sort of whole through the hurting process. You get that. You get sort of you convey salvation. You convey a sense of wholeness, and I think that's.
But do you have to go through the fire to get that? Does there have to be suffering in order for that to occur?
I don't know. I haven't figured a way around it.
Me neither.
Yes, it seems to be one follows the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's partly trial and error, you know. Just simply learning how to walk, you fall down, and you get up, and then you walk some, and then you fall down, and you have to. It's the only way that. And finally, we do learn how to walk, and we do pretty well at it. But it's not simple at first.
In some ways, the notion of forgetting, forgiving, relaxing from the struggle of fear and hopelessness and diminishedness and a sense of isolation and being cut off from your fellow woman, maybe as simple as opening your hand. You know, instead of being clenched up, it's possible to literally open outward. You know, there's something at the physical level as well as the spiritual level that can happen, where if you can adopt the posture of openness, that in itself can be somewhat helpful. You know, we're talking about the process of how do we accept the gifts that we have, and how do we yield to our natures. Breathe, the breath that you mentioned before about the sacredness of breath, you know, to affirm the vitality of being alive, the basic goodness of being alive, the simple freshness of being alive, like the child, the wonder of the child. It's pretty simple in a lot of ways. You know, we make it very complicated.
It's a kind of a reverencing sort of gesture. I mean, I don't know whether there's bowing and that kind of thing within the, but there is at the altar and that reverencing of the other in life. That's a very simple kind of thing that the body can do, and just that kind of recognizing the holy in the other, and that in some sense, if any of us is going to get there, we're all going to get there together.
I like that. What a nice statement.
Our time has come. Thank you. Our hour is over, and it's been good to have you here. Dr. Dick Does, a Buddhist teacher of meditation, and Reverend Craig Smith, pastor at the Trinity Episcopal Church in Shelburne. We've been talking about what is salvation for those different traditions, for anyone's tradition. So
it's been fun.
It's been good. It's been good. It doesn't seem that we're so far apart, the Buddhist and the Christian, as we converse. And I do know, as some of you do know, I know some Episcopal, Roman Catholic, and other groups where the clergyman is also a practicing Buddhist as well. So it's neat that we can share.
I'm a sort of a Catholic Buddhist, Catholic Baptist Buddhist myself. You know?
I didn't know there was a Baptist element there.
It just happens.
I have a good friend who's a Baptist minister in the South, and I've gotten a spirit from him.
All right.
I've been in his church a few times.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
That's interesting. Yeah, one of my teachers is, as Murray Bowen is certainly a Southern Baptist preacher.